systematic theology. It says that he's man. He's clearly born man here, but he says that he and the Father are one here, so he's clearly like God. And so you put that together, it creates a system. You have systematic theology. Now, when you do systematic theology, you have to, it's by necessity topical. You ask this question, what does the Bible say about blank? And then you look at through the rest of the Bible. And so here's what I'm saying. It's important to have expositional messages because biblical theology, walking through the Bible, knowing what it means, that's crucial. However, it's also crucial to to ask these questions. What does the system of Scripture say about blank? And so today we're kind of going to be doing a little bit of systematic theology. We're going to kind of go all over the place. I have 3 different passages that we're going to be in, but I just wanted to kind of give you that understanding before we kind of jump in here. So first we're going to talk about this theological principle, and we're in Revelation 21. And so the context, John is, he's having these visions about the future, about what God is going to do in the future, and God shows him this. He says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God.'" Okay, this is kind of a tangent, but let's just stop and think, how cool is this? John's just like seeing like this, the old earth passes away, the old heaven passes away, new heaven and a new earth are created, and to bridge the gap between heaven and earth in this new thing that God is doing, the new city comes out of heaven to earth and bridges the gap between the two, and God dwells there. No longer do we relate in the future, no longer do we relate to God in mystery and faith, but we see his revealed glory. And that's our future. That's what's coming. That's kind of why we named this church One Hope, because we think that the future is brighter than the present. There's always a reason to have hope. And what does it look like for God to dwell with man? Well, here, verse 4. "He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away." I think that could feed you for a whole week, I think, Just meditate on that one. Here's verse 5, and this is where we want to settle. "And he who was seated on the throne said, 'Behold,'" key words, "'I am making all things new.'" Behold, I am making all things new. God is a God of newness. Sometimes we say that God is a God of holiness. He's a God of justice. He's a God of love. He's a God of mercy. He's a God of goodness. I want to add to that list today that God is also a God of newness. We kind of see this in this passage. He's doing a lot of new things. You saw a new heaven, new earth, new Jerusalem, new thing. God is dwelling with man. At creation, God came and walked with Adam and Eve, but his dwelling place was still heaven. Now his dwelling place, it's new. He's moving into a new home. It's the new heaven and the new earth. We get to see him face to face. He's doing something new. But I want you to know this, that that's not just something for the future. It's not like God is all of a sudden, it's at some point in eternity future, all of a sudden he decides to be a God of newness. No, God doesn't change who he is. He's always been a God of newness. What we believe in eternity past is that God existed and nothing else existed. I love the Jesus Storybook Bible. If you're a parent and you have kids, man, you got to buy this Bible. It's so good for kids. But I love how they put it. They say that nothing but nothingness is what existed before creation. And then all of a sudden, at some point in eternity past, God decides to do something new. He creates. And how he creates is he speaks. And out of his voice, whole worlds and earths and planets and stars are formed. He does something new. And then he doesn't stop there. He then spends 7 days creating things. And on the 6th day, he creates man, and he does something new again. He decides to have a relationship with his creation. If you fast forward, there's a rebellion. There's all this awesome story, but I'm trying to summarize the entire Bible in 5 minutes, so we're going to skip some stuff, okay? So if you fast forward, you see that Adam has had all of these descendants. There are nations on the earth now, and out of these nations, God decides again to do something new. He picks one guy, one dude, calls him out of his country, out of his home, and says, if you will go here, if you will go to the new place that I'm calling you, I will bless you. And he even says this, through you, I will bless all the nations. And so God is doing a new thing. He's deciding that through one man, he's going to bless all of the nations. And in order to solidify this promise, he says, I'm promising that this is going to happen, and here's how you're going to know. We're going to do this ceremony, and if you've ever read Genesis 15, it's really fascinating because God asks him to do this covenant ceremony that they used to do back then. And what you would do is basically when you have like two warring parties who are going to make a treaty, a peace treaty, it had to be really serious, right? Because you don't want to go back to war again. And so what they would do is they would take these animals and they'd cut them in half and they'd put them on either side of a ditch, and the blood would drain into the middle of this ditch. And then they would walk through the ditch in the blood, and what they would basically say is, if I don't live up to my side of the promise, may this, what has happened to these animals, may this happen to me. But something new happens. That's what they typically did. Abraham cuts up the animals, prepares the ceremony, and then it says a deep darkness falls over him. And in this deep darkness, he sees a smoking pot and a flaming torch walk through the blood. Abraham never walks through the blood. This is new. What God is saying is, even if you don't live up to this promise, I will. And if I don't, may this happen to me. It's this amazing thing that God is saying. You have to see the humility that he would relate to us on such a human level. But whenever he does that, he does something new. Fast forward a couple hundred years, you have these people. Abraham has had these descendants. His son has had a son. His son has had a son. And that son had 12 sons. And those sons had many sons. And all of a sudden, they become this nation. And so God does something new again. He pulls them out of Egypt, brings them to the promised land, and he promises to have a relationship with them. We call it the Mosaic covenant. It happens on Mount Sinai. And in this fire and in this cloud of thick darkness, Moses goes up and he gets these tablets. And he comes down and he says, here, these are the rules of our relationship. Have you ever had, I don't know if the last time that you were dating, but I don't know if you've ever had the DTR, the Define the Relationship talk. It's an important talk to have because what are we? Are we dating? Are we trying to get married? I don't know. You have to have the DTR. God basically has this with Israel. He says, this is the relationship. You follow this and I will bless you. But if you fast forward another couple hundred years, there's a rebellion and they don't live up to what he has promised. So God again does something new. And he comes in human flesh. And I don't know if we reflect on this at Christmas. God is born. Can you believe that? Like God himself is born. He comes into humanity, puts on flesh, and then he does something new. He lives a perfect life. And then he does something new again, and he dies a horrible death. And then he does something new. He resurrects himself. And then he does something new. He ascends to heaven. Thousands of years later, then, a couple years later, he shows John this vision that we've been looking at, and God says, behold, I am making all things new. What I want you to see is that God doesn't just become a God of newness at some point in the future. He has always been a God of newness. I gave you the highlights, but in between are so many new things that God is up to. God is up to, even now, doing new things in human history. He does it on that level. It's cosmic. It's amazing. But he also does new things on a more personal level. He's constantly doing new things in our life. In fact, when we convert, when we have faith in him, he calls it a rebirth. It's something new. When we're reborn, we then engage in this process. In theology, we call it sanctification. It's the process of becoming more like him. You're constantly doing new things in your life, and he's constantly doing new things in you to make you more like him. God is a God of newness. And you have to see, the other thing that I want to point out here is he says, behold, I am making all things new. It's something that is something that's in the present tense. It's current. He's continuing to do this. God is in the process of making all things new. So that's the theological principle that I want you to know. God is a God of newness. He's a God of many things, light and love and justice and mercy and grace, but he is also a God of newness. Now, to add to that, to kind of increase our knowledge in the system of what God is saying here, I want to take you back. We're going to go from the last book of the Bible to the first book. We're going to go to Genesis. I just want to kind of color this idea that God is a God of newness. I want to add to it something that God also says. So if you go to Genesis, and we're going to look at verse 26, God's in the middle of creating everything, and God says this, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image and likeness.'" If you skip down to verse 27, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them." I don't know if you know this, but in Christianity, we believe that we're made in God's image. That means we look like him. We reflect who he is, and that means a lot of things. God is a God of grace. We show grace. God is a God of love. We have the capacity to love. God is a God of justice. We have the capacity to understand what right and wrong is. We're made in his image. But also, if God is a God of newness, if he's a God who's constantly creating new things, then us being made in his image means that we are also creative. I don't know if you, is there any artists in here? Anybody draw or paint or anything? Nobody? Good. Me neither. Who needs it? Has anybody ever done any creative writing? You've written a poem or a story or a novel? Anybody? Yeah, we got some people. That's awesome. That one's more me too. Has anybody ever... I think sometimes we think that creativity is just for the arts. Has anybody ever seen something in your workplace and you thought, that's not the right way to do it. We need to do it this way. Anybody ever thought that? That should be all of us, right? I want you to see that in that moment, what you're doing is you're being creative. You're looking at the old way of doing things and you're deciding to do something new. And when you're doing that, you might not pick the right thing to do. You might not, the new thing that you want to do might not work out. But the drive to be creative, the drive to do something new, that's something that comes from God. That's something that you are reflecting who he is because you are made in his image. So if God is a God of newness and we're made in his image, then that means that we're intensely creative people. We create new relationships. We create new ways of doing things. We make a house a home. Have you ever heard that? That's doing something new. It's being creative. That's something that we do at being made in his image. Another thing that being made in his image, I want you to see this. I don't have a verse for this because it's all over. God very often works in the supernatural. He does something that's like amazing, like a miracle. One of my favorite examples of this is Israel. Jerusalem is like under siege from Assyria, and they're like, I don't know what we're gonna do, and they even send this guy, and he walks up to the walls, and he's yelling over the walls to make everybody scared. He says, "You trust in your God, but we're gonna kill all of you." And the next day they wake up, and the whole army has just been killed by the angel of the Lord. It's this amazing, I get goosebumps. It's an amazing story of how God works supernaturally. Though that happens a lot. However, God mostly operates in what we would call the natural. God uses us to do the things that he wants to do. In theology, we call this human agency. It means that God sends us, and we see this in the Great Commission, God sends us to do his will. He uses us to accomplish what he wants done. And so, if God is a God of newness, if he's always doing something new, then and he often works in human agency, then what that means is that we are people of his newness, that we are sent out to do new things, that when Jesus says, go therefore and make disciples of all the earth, that's something new. that when we share our faith and somebody comes to a knowledge of Jesus, something new just happened in that human heart, something cosmic. And it can seem so mundane, but you have to understand that God is a God of newness, and he is making all things new. He's in this process, and when we go with him, he uses us to create that newness. We are people of his newness. And so I want to stop here and just ask you, what do you think maybe that God is calling you to do in this new year that is new? Think about your job. God has made us creative. So is there something new that you can do to make things run better, to make it a better office environment, to make your performance better. I don't know if you know this. I love this. I don't know if you know the story where Jesus, he turns water into wine, and then the head of the party, he's like, oh, this is really good wine. If you've ever read Charles Spurgeon, he has this quote on that verse. He's like, well, yeah, of course Jesus made good wine. He's the Lord, okay? Like, he's not going to just half do it, you know? So here's the thing. We're made in his image. When we go to work, that means that we're doing new things. And when we do new things, it's not just mediocre wine that we're making. We do new things that are good because that's a part of what it means to be made in his image. What is God calling you to do new at work? What maybe is God calling you to do in your relationships? How many of you are parents? Anybody? It doesn't matter if your kids are in the house or if they're not. You're parents, right? What's something new that you can do in your relationship with your kids? I don't know if you know this, but kids get older. Weird. They get older, and so things have to change. The way you relate to them has to change. For me, one thing that I started doing recently, I have 2 daughters, and if you know me, they are the apple of my eye. And at a gas station, when I'm filling up the car, what I'll do as the gas is pumping, they sit in the back seat. They have their 2 car seats. I walk up to the glass, and I breathe on it, and it fogs it up, and I just draw a heart on the glass. And my oldest daughter is like, she's just like me. She's like a super romantic, and I can see her through the tinted glass. She's just like, you know, didn't just drop my mic. I did. And I tell her, I say, you know, honey, I want you to, when you see this heart, I want you to know. I want it to be a symbol. I want you to know I drew that because I love you. That's just something new that I'm doing to make sure that my kids understand that their father loves them, so that later in life, when their life is bleak, when they're suffering, they can sing that song, Good, Good Father, because they know, they've seen it modeled, that fathers are good. What is God calling you to do new in your marriage? Here's just a thought, guys, just a suggestion. What if for this next year you purposed and determined to always have live, fresh flowers in your house? And just kind of like that heart that I drew, maybe you tell your wife, when you see these flowers, I want you to know that I love you. And when they die, you replace them. It's the thoughtfulness. It's the continual, I'm constantly thinking, I want you to constantly know that I love you. That's just a thought. Take that idea, do whatever you want with it. Change it, do something. Maybe she's not a flower lady. Maybe she just wants you to do the laundry for a year. You know, that works. That's fine. Ladies, is this the year that you do something new in your relationship, and maybe this is the year that you learn how to play football, what the rules are, what is holding, what is pass interference? Maybe just learn some of that, you know? Maybe your guy's not a football guy. Maybe you learn his favorite brewery, and you make sure he's always stocked with his favorite stuff, unless he has an alcohol problem. Don't do that then. Jesus turned water into wine. It's okay. Just not, in moderation. Anyway. But you see what I'm saying here? What is something new that you can do in your relationship to make sure that the other person feels like you're loved, like they're loved by you? God is a God of newness, and we're made in his image, and we are agents of his newness. And so figuring out our impulse at the end of the year to set goals for the next year, that's a part of being made in his image. That's us reflecting who he is. And so, I promised at the beginning that I wouldn't do 4 ways to set a goal, and I'm not going to do that. But maybe just think about it. That was funnier than I thought it would be. Here's what I want to do next. We've kind of talked about this theological principle that God is a God of newness. We've talked about some other theological ideas that kind of color that we're made in his image, which means that we do new things. We've talked about how God uses human agency to accomplish his will, which means we're people of his newness. I kind of want to just tie this all together in a story. And this is from the book of Judges. How many of you have ever read through Judges? Anybody? Oh, so you know it. Stuff gets jacked up, bro. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context here. In the book of Judges, Israel has conquered, kind of, the promised land, and they're trying to set up this new thing that God has called them to do, that they would be his people, but they kind of stink at it. And so they go through this cycle over and over and over again over the about 400-year period of their history that the book of Judges represents. They go through this cycle of loving God and then leaving God and then being enslaved by a surrounding nation because God doesn't protect them anymore because they're not pursuing him. And then they cry out to God and God saves them, so they love God, so then they forget God, and it's just over and over and over again. And by the way, if that sounds familiar, that's because that's how we operate too. We constantly go through that cycle. But I want to show you the story of Gideon. This is going to be in Judges 6, verse 11. So so Israel has forgotten God. This nation, Midian, oppresses Israel. And what they do, this is this kind of special thing that they do. Whenever the harvest is in the fall, they come in and they take all of the harvest. They just take it all. They take the livestock. They take the wheat. They take the corn. They didn't have corn. They take all of the stuff that they have grown, and they take it and they haul it back off to Midian. And so Israel, it says in one of the verses in verse 6, it says that Israel was brought very low. And you can just imagine how if you had zero nourishment for years, that you would be brought very low. This is a time of intense suffering for Israel. So they cry out to God, and God says, okay, here we go. I'm going to do this again. And this is how he does it. He does something new. This is verse 11. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth, which is an oak tree, at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon was beating out the wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. Here's what's going on, because that sounded a little weird, right? So basically, when you harvest wheat, has anybody ever peeled garlic before? Yeah, right, because it's delicious. When you peel garlic, you know that there's this tough outer shell that you have to kind of peel off. That's why you have to peel garlic, because it's got a shell around it. Wheat is similar, not the same, but similar. It has this tough outer thing that kind of protects it. And in order to kind of separate the good stuff from the bad stuff, they would do this thing where you put a bunch of wheat in a big bowl and you kind of flip it up in the air. It goes up in the air, and the act of it coming down and hitting the bowl separates the seed from the chaff. And you toss it a couple times, because every time you tossed it, if there was a good wind, the wind would take away the bad stuff, so you wouldn't even have to pick through it. It's just like perfect. You toss it up in the air, the wind gets rid of the bad stuff, all the seeds come back down to the ground. Now that's how they would typically do it. Gideon is not doing that. Gideon's in a wine press. He's separating the wheat from the chaff. And the reason he's doing that is because this act of throwing things up in the air is very obvious. And if the Midianites are coming to take your harvest, you probably want to hide your harvest, right? Like you wouldn't just, oh, here we go, guys. Here I am. Take it. That's so mean. So I want you to see that Gideon, when God finds him, is in this wine press. He's kind of cowering. He's hiding. He's not showing courage, that's for sure. And this is what God says to him. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor." Here's what I want you to see. Very often when God wants to do something new in our lives, we hate change. And when God is constantly in the process of renewing things, making things new, and he wants to do something new in us, it always comes when we're operating under the old system. If God does new things, then that means that there are old things, right? And so when we meet Gideon, he's operating under the old system. He's separating the chaff from the wheat in a place where nobody could see him. He's operating this old oppressive system, and God steps in and he wants to do something new. And often when God does that, it's shocking. I don't know if you've ever, like in a really rough moment in life, had somebody come in and just say the exact right thing at the right time. And it's like a shearing effect. It's like whiplash. It's like this was so bad, but what you just said was so good. It was new. I don't know if you've ever had a time in your life in which you were so clearly, you were dead set on this is what I'm doing for the rest of my life. This is my dream. This is my will. And God says, maybe this. We're doing something new. It's kind of shocking. It's surprising. And when God comes to Gideon, who's cowering, and he says, hey, I'm calling you a mighty man of valor, you have to understand that Gideon would be like, what? Seriously? What Gideon does next is so characteristic of all of us too. He says, then Gideon said to him, please, Lord, if the Lord is with us, then why has all of this happened to us? And where is all the wonderful deeds that our fathers have recounted to us, saying, did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hand of Midian. And the Lord turned and said to him, go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do I not send you? You see, Gideon comes up with an excuse. I think when God wants to do something new in our lives, we very often come up with an excuse. Is anybody else like me? You're like, oh, I'm the king of excuses. I can wiggle my way out of anything, right? Have you ever tried to do that and then God just doesn't leave? You're like, but I made an excuse. And he's like, I'm still here, man. You're doing this. And you're like, ugh. Gideon says, he makes this excuse, like if God is with us, what you're saying can't be true. And I want you to see this, that sometimes when we make an excuse to God, he doesn't always answer what we have. Oh man, mic problems. There we go. Sometimes that happens. Okay. I want you to see that sometimes we bring our excuses to God. Here's the thing. God doesn't say, Gideon, shut up. Why did you say that? I can't believe that you would come up with an excuse. No. What does God say? He says, go in this might of yours. You have to see, I think sometimes we think it's not okay to tell God that we're not okay with this. Sometimes we think, I have these excuses, I have this thing, and I don't want to say it. Over and over and over and over in Scripture, we see that the people that God uses, they bring their excuses before him. Excuses are okay if you deal with them with God. It's when you don't deal with them with God that they can run amok. In fact, there's this biblical genre called laments. And in every lament, there's a protest. God, why are you doing this? They question him. And we see this over and over and over again, that God responds with kindness and gentleness. Sometimes he says, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Sometimes he says that. But he always responds with this loving, fatherly power. And in this case, in Gideon's case, he says, go in this might of yours and rescue Israel. Gideon says this, and he said to him, please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least of my father's house. And the Lord said to him, but I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man. When God is doing something new, and we bring our excuses before him, very often it's going to what God's going to do is he's going to reinforce our identity in him. I think sometimes when things are changing, and it's hard to change, sometimes the people around us and the circumstances, they preach a different message to us. You can't do it. You're doing the wrong thing. God hasn't called you to change this. Why would you even do that? They preach this message to us, and it can make us feel very, very on edge, I think, very off base. But I want you to see this. When God is doing something new, he always reassures you of your identity in him, that you are his child, that he loves you. And in this case, God encourages Gideon. I love this. He says, you're going to go and you're going to strike Midian as one man. If you know the rest of the story, Gideon does a bunch of new things because that's what God's telling him to do. He recruits this army of only 300. Well, first it's 15,000, but God's like, no, we're going to do this with 300 people. And God says, hey, and actually you're not going to attack the Midianites. What you're going to do is you're going to surround their encampment, and you're going to break a bunch of jars and have a bunch of torches. You're not even going to attack them. And Gideon's like, God, that's not how it's usually done. Don't you know the old system? And God says, no, I'm doing something new. And so in the middle of the night, they break all these jars. It creates this loud noise. All these torches are all of a sudden lit. And the Midianites wake up because of all these pots being broken, and they see all of these torches, and they think that they're surrounded, and they get confused, and they start killing each other, and they start running away because it's the middle of the night. They have no idea what's going on. And through God's new thing, Israel is delivered. And I want you to see that very often in our lives, God does something new, and it might not be on that scale, but it might be life-changing. I don't know if God is calling you to do something new in this new year. If you feel that, if you have that drive, I want you to know that that's a part of you being made in the image of God, that the drive to be creative, to do new things, that's a good thing. I want you to see that we're agents of his newness, that he's renewing the world through us. And I want you to see that sometimes in our lives, when he does something new, we have these excuses. But God always reassures us, he gives us a new identity, and he encourages us. I'm going to bring the band up, but I want to finish with this blessing. May you know the God of newness. May you be convinced that you are made in his image and likeness. May you become an agent of his newness in this new year. May you always bring your excuses before him, and may you always hear his encouragement. Let's pray.